Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Liz Fosseline, co-author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, No Hard Feelings, The Secret Power of Embracing Emotions at Work. Liz also serves as head of content at Humu, where she helps teams and leaders develop the skills and habits that allow them to unlock their full potential. Welcome to the show, Liz. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in San Francisco.
Nice.
So we've been on lockdown again for a couple weeks now. Yep.
We just joined you again, by the way. We're also back in tier 3, what we call it here in lockdown. So
yeah.
Although every day now, more and more of us are getting the vaccine.
I've been seeing that. Yeah, it's a weird time. It's like the end is in sight, but also things are really bad. So
yeah, it's like my wife's grandmother got her vaccine today.
Wow, that's like incredible.
It was kind of like, I don't know, it's like mixed feelings. Like you're excited about it, but you're also like, oh, it's so new and you don't really know how it's going to play out. But it's kind of there's some light in the tunnel, it seems, as well.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Before we jump in, how have you been during all of this?
Yeah, I've been okay. I think it's been a challenging year, but I think I finally settled into a work from home routine. I feel lucky to be able to work from home completely. And like you said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, so things are feeling better.
You have I know I mentioned a little bit of your background, but tell us a bit more, because you have quite, I think, a very interesting background. So share more sort of about yourself personally and your journey to where we are now.
Let's see. My first job out of college was very much, so my parents immigrated to the US and have that mentality of you get a job, you do what needs to be done, you work hard, you climb the ladder, you stay at that job, very solid, stable, the income comes in. And so I got a job that seemed to kind of check all the success boxes. It was an economic consulting role. I went into a big, tall building. I thought all my coworkers were great. They were great. I put on a fancy suit, was dealing with numbers. It just all felt like the job that you're supposed to have. And about 2 years into that, I just really burnt out and didn't know what I was going to do next. And so I ended up just leaving and working at Starbucks as a barista, trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. And that experience really caused me to reflect, because it was scary then to try and figure out where do I want to go next? This is what I thought was going to be my career path for the rest of my life. And I totally struck out because I hated it. And when I looked back, I started doing a lot of research into behavioral psychology, also just what creates a culture, what kind of work might I be interested in. And I was able to realize that the work really wasn't suited to my strengths or my interest, but also that I had handled the situation incorrectly. So I kind of just put my head down. What people assigned to me, I did. It really never occurred to me that I could ever go to my manager and say something like, hey, these are the things that I feel like I'm doing well at, and I'd love to have more assignments in this space. Here's something I'd love to learn. So at least to make the best of that role, or at least craft it a bit more to serve my interests and skills, that just completely never occurred to me. And it also never occurred to me to talk to anyone and let them know that I wasn't enjoying the role, to seek help. And so that was kind of the start of this journey. Then I moved to New York, worked there, met a friend. She had a similar experience. And then we started working on this book about how emotions affect work. And through that book, interviewed Laszlo Bock, who's the former SVP of People Operations at Google, started a company called Humu, and then kind of ended up working with him at Humu. He's incredible. So after I spoke with him, I remember thinking, like, I just want to learn from this person. And now I'm lucky enough to be able to do that.
Wow, what a journey. Your creative side is something you've tapped into as well. I don't want to kind of miss that. You also illustrate the book. You illustrate the book as well. And
so the book.
Also a creative director as well.
Yeah, in a previous role. Yeah.
Previous role.
And so now as head of content, which is sort of a nebulous term, kind of everything written comes through me, but then I also help inform how we bring some of the concepts in our work to life through visuals or storytelling. So it's a really nice blend of kind of translating a lot of scientific concept into pieces of text that are engaging and easy to act on, and that also Yeah, just make it, don't put the onus on the person to have to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, great. So it's kind of tapping into all of your passions in new role, which is super exciting. And you get to work with Laszlo, who's also great. It's amazing as well.
Yeah.
For those that aren't aware of Humu, give them a kind of a quick overview.
Yeah, so Humu is an action management platform, and we help organizations improve every single week. So instead of focusing on complex planning processes, we nudge employees, which helps them get started taking action right away. So a great example is when COVID hit in March and there was this sort of overnight shift into a work from home economy for many people. I think in the UK, overnight, like 1 in 2 people stopped going into offices, which is wild. I think before the numbers were like 3% of people were working from home. And so there we were able to that day start sending out nudges to people, helping them put into place work from home habits, remember to stay connected with people, combat stress, help leaders offer their people flexibility during that really rough transition. So it's very much about immediate responsive action.
And what did these nudges come in the form of the Humu app, or is it integrated in other people's platform? What does that look like? Does that curiosity?
Yeah, so it depends a bit on what employees want, but we really try to meet them in the places where they already work. So a lot of it's actually email. People can also pick Slack. We now have an app experience, so they can go there. But we kind of let the employee customize. We just don't want it to be another thing that they have to do and check.
I'm so excited you just said that, by the way, because we're trying, it's like the consumer experience. There's so many companies are trying to pull people to them, but just go to where they already are. It's same with our podcast. So I'm like, wherever you want to listen. If you want to listen on Alexa, great. If you want to listen on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, SoundCloud, rather than trying to drag people to us, just go to them. That's a great decision. Super excited to hear that. What are you hearing from sort of managers and leaders during these critical times?
Kind of 2 things. One, that they're having more meetings than ever. I think Microsoft actually did a study looking at time and how their employees are spending their time since that shift to remote work. And managers are in meetings all day. They're also working during periods when they didn't used to work. So think lunch, evenings, weekends, kind of.
when they're normally commuting, now they're working. I don't know. I'm seeing that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's driven by the second thing that I've been hearing from a lot of managers and leaders, which is that they really just feel like they've lost one of their senses. So when everyone was in the office, they could kind of walk through the halls. If there was an open office floor plan, they could just look out and get just a pulse on what's going on within their team, department. And now there's really the only way to do that is kind of to have one-on-one check-ins or have a meeting, but then you still don't get all those cues, body language. You're not really connecting with people as easily. So I think that has led to lots more meetings, which has then led to people needing to work during all these times that they used to have more downtime.
You're right. You don't have those social cues where if you have a quick question, you can just go over and pop over and see someone. Or Shane's at the water cooler. Let me quickly grab him there and ask that question. And that results in 3 or 4 more Zoom calls that are now scheduled. Which is super unnecessary.
And everyone's schedules are wild. Like if you try to schedule with anyone, it's just a solid block for days.
No, you are right. It's funny because some of our partners that we have on the podcast, when I give them a phone call, they're almost surprised. And I'm like, they're like, oh, hi. I'm like, people don't call anyone anymore, do they? They just,
that's something else that I've been hearing too, which is because just every single meeting has sort of defaulted into video call because we've just gotten so used to that. But then there's something where people, like I've heard this too. So a friend recently was introduced to someone and it was kind of an introductory call for the other person to learn about her company. And that person scheduled a video call. And she said, normally it would just be a phone call. Or I've heard from freelancers where their clients would normally just call them on the phone and are now FaceTiming them or scheduling video calls. And they're saying not everything needs to be a video call. And they're also, video calls are very strange. Like if you think about in the real world, I would never stand 3 feet away from you and stare at you directly for 30 minutes, right? Maybe we would walk or we would eat something. Like there's just so many other things that I could look at. But now the only way to communicate to you that I'm paying attention to you is to just, and that's very strange. And so it's draining to be on video calls. So I would actually push people, let's bring back the phone call.
I'm that guy.
Not everything.
I'm that guy, by the way, Liz.
Great, you're leading the charge.
Yeah, I'm like, just even to some of my new starters, and it's not their fault. They're scheduling all these calls. I'm like, just give me a call. we don't need to have a half an hour Zoom slot.
Yeah.
To have
I
this
think especially if you're dealing with time zones too,
Yes.
Getting on a Zoom call, it does require you can't be in your pajamas. It's not, so especially if you're doing it early or late for someone, just making it a phone call.
One of the things that a lot of the leaders we're seeing, including myself in the very beginning, is we're struggling to figure out how much emotion we should express in front of our people. What should leaders consider when it comes to showing up authentically? How much do we do that? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I've gotten this question from a lot of leaders. So this year has been kind of unique. It's very challenging, and everyone's going through this extremely anxiety-provoking thing together. So in the book, what we recommend is that leaders practice something called selective vulnerability. And that means walking the line between sharing, which builds trust, and oversharing, which destroys it. So an important part of leader is really thinking about how much your people can bear the burden of what's going on with you. I'll take an extreme example just to illustrate this, which is layoffs, which a lot of companies unfortunately had to go through earlier this year or are still going through. And in that example, selective vulnerability. So there's on the one extreme, which is showing too much emotion, is that the leader would come in and say like, we have to lay people off, and then kind of just break down and say, this is so hard. I never thought we'd have to do this. I'm really anxious about the future. I'm so sorry. And that's just not going to create
anxiety amongst everyone.
Exactly. People are going to think that they're getting laid off and they're going to look for other jobs. However, if the leader comes in on the other side and says, layoffs happened this morning, let's get to the next agenda item, that's also going to cause instability, because people are going to think like, well, I have no information. You don't seem like a human. You just laid off all these people and you don't seem to care. Why would you care about me? And so selective vulnerability is coming in and having that moment of vulnerability saying, unfortunately, we had to lay people off. It was a really difficult decision. It was hard. I know that we've grown close to them. We're helping them find new jobs, but I want to let you know. So then this is where you pair that moment of vulnerability with a path forward. So I want to let you know, we don't expect to do more layoffs. Here is what we're doing as a leadership team to make sure that we are still, doing well as a business. Here's what we need from you to help us get there. If you have any questions, here's how you can ask, like, here's a forum, here's my email, whatever. But it's really about opening up a little and then also still having that stability, showing that you're still composed enough to think through what your team needs from you.
In the book, do you share like the kind of entire process as well for people?
Yeah, so kind of the very simplified process is a moment of vulnerability plus path forward. And that path forward should include
missing that path forward part.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't just have that and then just leave it there, because otherwise it needs to be a path forward. If you had to give sort of leaders 3 things to focus on right now, what would that be? Because I think we're all overwhelmed, and many managers have never been in this position before. And actually, even next year, it's going to be even more interesting when they're in this crazy dynamic where they're going to be managing. Part of their employees are going to be at home, other half's going to be in the office, others going to be blended. So now I'm a manager and I've got 3 different sets of employees working different ways. So what kind of 3 pieces of advice you'd ask them to focus on right now?
It's a great question. And I'm so curious about what happens to work in the next year, because there seem to be a lot of differing opinions. We've also done surveys at Humu, and there's a huge range in terms of, do people want to return to offices or not? So I'm very curious to see what happens there. But the 3 things that I would advise leaders, the first is, I really hate the phrase, the new normal. I think it's so easy to, as time goes on, as humans, we just acclimate to what's going on around us. And just to remember, this is not normal, right? COVID isn't gone. We're still struggling to work from home. People are still having to homeschool their kids, or they're taking care of, someone that is sick. And so really remembering to continue checking in at the start of meetings, saving that 5 minutes at the beginning to ask how someone's doing, ask what kind of flexibility they need. And I've seen too, leaders were pretty good about this in the first couple months, and now have maybe backed off of that a bit, but it's still important just to check in on what people are going through. We've also seen at Humu that one of the number 1 predictors of whether or not someone is going to be successful during COVID is if they perceive that leadership is empathetic to their needs and to their situation. So really prioritizing that and continue to do so. The second thing I would say is, when people have to come back to the office, really communicating a why. So it's going to be scary. People haven't been back in the office. And the best policy is likely not going to be a blanket, everyone back June 1st, no matter what. It's going to be a rollout. And so people are going to want to know. You want to pull them into the office. You don't want to push them into the office. So really being clear, this team is coming in Monday, Wednesdays, and it's because we think that you would really benefit from the in-person time. And we're going to focus on those, on brainstorming and making decisions and things that are harder to do asynchronously. And then the third thing is, when you're in that situation where some people are in the office and some aren't, is making sure that you're measuring performance and not access. So it's going to be so easy to hand jobs or ask questions to the person that's just sitting next to you or down the hall, and to completely forget about the people that are at home or have to call in on Zoom. And so I think that's going to be a place that leaders need to really be concerned about bias creeping in. I don't have a perfect solution for it, but I do think it's something people need to be mindful of.
When you speak to people that have read the book, what's the most common feedback that you get?
There's two things that come up often. So we often get feedback about our section on feedback, ironically, so we say something like, the best feedback is very specific and it's actionable. It's not vague. So it's really different to say, that presentation just kind of missed the mark. I want it to be more fun. That is so hard to act on. Than to say, slide 3 repeated slide 2, and in slide 4, I think you could hit on this point a little harder, spend more time on that, super actionable, easy to improve. But we also say that because of bias, often when people are working with people who are different than they are, they actually withhold feedback for fear of being seen as mean or as biased. So this comes up actually a lot with men and women. So male managers will just be nicer to women, to their reports, because they want to be seen as supportive of women in the workplace. When in fact, that's really bad, because you're withholding, you're withholding the information that they need to
progress,
get better. Exactly. And so that is something we've heard a lot that resonated with a lot of people. And then the second thing is just crying. So anytime you talk about emotions at work, everyone wants to know about crying. What do you do? How do you handle it? What if someone starts crying when I'm on a video call with them? And so for that, we say, just turn off the camera, and you might want to say, why don't you turn off your camera? Let's stop. Why don't you take some time, whatever you need, we can reschedule this meeting, or just shoot me a message or an email when you're ready to get back on. And then using that as an opportunity to better understand what's going on with them. I think as a manager, especially, your role, one, it might be something that you can't fix, and then you should just listen. It's really easy as a manager to want to fix everything, but we're in a situation where you can't. So keeping that in mind. But then also, if it seems like something that you might have control over, getting to the core of what's really bothering them. So maybe they just feel frustrated in their work. There's a blocker. They don't really understand why the company made a decision. And so I think often people kind of get stuck on the, I want to comfort this person stage, but you also need to understand the need that is driving their strong emotions and see if you can help them work on that need.
You also made a good point that I learned very early on as a manager that I can't solve everything. I don't have all the answers, and that's also okay.
Yeah.
In the beginning, I was trying to solve every problem my employees had. I was like, I don't have all the answers, and no one expects me to have all the answers.
Yeah, it's hard as a leader to actually admit and accept that.
Yeah. That's especially because I've been in situations where I've had employees cry and get upset face to face, but not on Zoom. And I can only imagine the complex that takes it to a very different place. You mentioned you've done a number of surveys at Humu. What are some of the other? What are you hearing? Is this with customers? What are you hearing from your customers? Because your customers are our listeners. In many cases as well. So what are you hearing from them?
Yes, exactly. So our customers are large enterprise organizations, and we nudge their employees. So that's who we run surveys on, ask questions. And then we also send out these nudges that have feedback loops. So in every single nudge, people can let us know, I am going to act on this. I really enjoyed receiving this. This is not relevant to me. I did not find this useful. So we're also able to see what are people responding to. So we actually recently looked at the top nudges that we sent out over the last year. And again, the nudges are selected. People receive nudges based on what we know that they need to work on. And then within that set, they tell us which ones they really like. And the top one doesn't sound like rocket science, but was just like, make time for lunch with your coworkers. So remembering to put on your calendar, this is my break. And maybe once or twice a week, I'm going to take that break with 3 random coworkers just to maintain that social connection. And I think it's so easy when you work remotely to just keep working and forget what time it is, and to not take those breaks. It's just like, I just have all this other stuff coming in. I'm just going to keep going through my email. But being intentional about that, and then also being intentional about maintaining those relationships, especially with people who aren't on your team. So I did this personally 2 weeks ago with an engineer and realized that I had not spoken to her in 7 months. And we used to sit next to each other in the office and talk all the time. And so it's really easy to let those relationships kind of slide. So that was a big one. And then interestingly, what we're hearing from employees also differs by sector. So in the tech world, employees really care about growth and development. And that's probably because they have an easier time working from home. They're like already set up for it better. They're probably used to all the technology that they need to be using. So they kind of have the luxury of focusing on where's my career going because of all of this. In sectors like telecom, financial services, retail, where people are sort of dealing more directly with customers and with things that are like telecom, the only way that we have really to talk to our loved ones now is telecommunications. So if that goes down, if we have an issue, we're going to be really, really upset. And so in those sectors, we're seeing a lot of people struggling with stress, with burnout. So it's interesting that it also varies depending on, what kind of company you work at.
I'm sure you must have seen a huge increase in I'm not talking about sales on the show, but in people buying the book during this time.
It's been, that's also been one of the biggest topics, both at Humu and then kind of in the work that I do with the book, which is managers just saying, I've never had to have emotional conversations before in this way.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start. Like, what do I do? Do I even have them? Is this appropriate? So yeah, there's been a big increase in interest in sort of the emotions at work topic.
So what's the biggest mistake that you see managers make?
Sort of assuming that they've communicated effectively. I think it's really easy to say, I'm here for you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Here are our goals for the next 3 months. And then just assume that everyone's got it. But there's
like you're saying it, but you're not really meaning it. It's like very kind of,
or even if you mean it, it's just very different. Like you need to pair that with then in one-on-ones, setting aside time for it in the next 5 minutes or the last 5 minutes of the meeting are just for you to ask me questions. What's not clear? What do you need help with? Making sure, also to have part of that conversation, be like, do you have the flexibility do you need? How does your workload feel? It's not, I think, especially when you're in a virtual environment, people, their dog is running around. There's so much stuff going on that they probably won't get it the first time necessarily. And so it's about that reinforcement. I think really being intentional about, you're going to sound like you're saying the same thing over and over and over again. But if that's what it feels like, that means you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm. We've been asking a lot of CHROs recently, what are the learnings they've had this year that are going to carry over the next year? What are some of the things that you, the team, have learned that you really focus on carrying over into next year?
Yeah, I think the value of heads down time, because that is harder in the office, especially we had an open office floor plan. And so my job involves a lot of writing. And so I actually do really enjoy I can block off 4 hours in the afternoon and I don't have kids. So it's quiet. And that I've learned is really increases my productivity. And I think I've heard that across the board, just this like very focused time is great. We also saw that so we did a study before COVID on what's the optimal work from home time. And we found that it's 3 days in the office, 1 to 2 days working from home. And that's because people have enough time to get to know each other, interact, but then they still have enough time for that focused, heads down, like really, crank out the work that you need to crank out. So I hope that some kind of schedule that affords that will stay. And then I think companies have also, which I really hope continues, gotten better at onboarding. Well, I don't know if they've gotten better at onboarding, but remote onboarding has kind of, yeah. Well, it's also illuminated some of the problems that existed with old onboarding, which is now I'm getting a lot of questions around like, I really want this employee to feel like a part of the culture. I want them to start to form relationships with their coworkers. How do I set that up? And I'm glad people are asking that, because I have been through some in-person onboarding processes that did not care about that at all. You know, it was like, here's your desk, your computer has not been set up yet. Here's a binder with your healthcare options. See you tomorrow. And that's your first day. And that's a horrible welcome into the organization. So I'm glad that we're being forced to kind of reassess how we bring people into a company.
I'm seeing some really interesting ways that companies are doing it as well. You know, one of the Citros I spoke to recently was saying how amazing it is now that whenever they onboard people virtually, they've onboarded over 1,500 people in the last couple of months. And she said that I can now set up a call where the CEO can spend time virtually with all of those. Whereas beforehand, there was no way of like, you know, bringing them all over the world to our office to meet the CEO.
Yeah.
Now in terms of they get to feel who we are, you know, the culture, and they do a number of kind of virtual calls where some of them are like virtual tours. Some of them are kind of meet the CEO, and they're being able to do things they couldn't do before. And they're like, why didn't we do this before? We could have done this before very easily, right? But it's forced. Even a couple of companies I know now are making sure, you know, they send out the laptops and everything, you know, weeks in advance. So when they turn up on day one, everything's already prepared. You don't have to sit there and log in and sign contracts. It's all done. So you can focus on actually, you know, building relationships and becoming part of the culture and what that means.
Yeah, I love those shifts. I think those all seem very positive.
Yeah. When you wrote the book, what was the biggest takeaway that you know, during the research, what was the biggest surprise that you got, or the biggest learning moment that you personally had whilst researching and writing the book?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if it was a surprise, but one of my favorite things that I learned was actually a question that Adam Grant recommends people ask when they're interviewing at a company. And that question is, tell me about something that would only happen at your company. I love that one because it sort of gets at the emotional culture of a place. And in my experience, both people telling me that they've used it and then I used it once, the reactions vary. So you get this split-second reaction that is very informative. So if I say, you know, what's something that would only happen at your company, people do either like they have this immediate like fear response.
It
and
sounds
that's usually,
like
because they're just remembering some horrible experience, or they kind of light up immediately and have this really wonderful story to share. So I think it's a great question to ask when you're interviewing at places. And then the second thing is just really, I mean, I work in tech, so it's, you know, constant iteration, but writing a book reinforced that, you know, good enough is better than nothing. For me, it was really easy to get bogged down in like the sentence structure and the perfect word. That's not going to change the world or help anyone. So it helped me get faster at just being like, okay, this is 90% and 90% is still like really good, and it's better to get it out than to sit on this for another 3 years.
Yeah, I hear so many authors say that they're just super critical to the point where it needs to get to the point where you just got to put it out. And as you said, the people that are going to be, you know, impacted by it, and it's going to help. You know, you're kind of doing them a disservice the more you hold on to it. So and that's the first book you ever.
That's the first book. We're working on a second currently. So the first book was No Hard Feelings, so kind of just taking on emotions at work. And the second book, it doesn't have a title yet, but it's basically Very Hard Feelings. So really diving into all of the feelings, but things like uncertainty, perfectionism, comparison. So things that we've heard come up over and over that are a little thorny or need more exploration.
Yeah. And I think we all suffer from that, don't we, though? It's like, one of the questions I ask every guest is, what was the biggest challenge that you faced in becoming a chief HR officer or CEO? And it's always that fear of failure. Always, every 99%, or the feel I'm not good enough, or that I couldn't do it, or that it had to be perfect, otherwise I couldn't put it out. Whereas a product, right? We all suffer from that. And it took me a long time to kind of get over that now. And I realize now the quicker I put it out into the universe or to my customers, the quicker I can actually, perfect it and actually provide a service people want. I know it's a bit different with a book because you can't just take it back and rewrite it, but
Yeah.
the more I hold on to things, it doesn't actually help.
It's easy to forget that learning is a failure-ridden process, right? You try, you don't do so great, you try again, you get feedback, you change something, you try one more time, you ask a question, and then over time, that's actually how you become an expert in something. And there's also research that shows that asking people for help and advice along the way makes them like you a lot more. So not only is it useful to you, but also it's a better way of just like building a network of people who support you.
Yeah, as opposed to just sitting there until you have this perfect picture.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always look at, which makes me laugh sometimes, is our original business plan.
Oh.
Shane is like, I'm like, this is nothing what we do. Like, I know not nothing, but it's like so far apart, like away from what we did, and we have pivoted a million times. And obviously, COVID is another huge pivot in the business. And every single entrepreneur I speak to, I'm like, everyone's the same. It's like this kind of this idea of this perfect business plan. Just
I love there's a CHRO that I spoke with who said that she no longer calls plans. She calls them plans from which we will deviate. And so it's really saying like, this is our best guess and it's fine if this isn't what's going on in 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like you got the kind of the two destinations and it's just like up and down all the way to in different directions. You'll get there in the end, but the route is not a linear line to get there. And I wish I knew that going in, to be honest, because that was one of the biggest shocks. Like, is this normal? We've had 20 different iterations of our business plan and what that looks like. And I'm realizing in any department, in any organization, in any business is exactly the same.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've talked to friends at, companies like Airbnb that just IPO'd. And even there, it's like, there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of chaos at certain points. Yeah. So I think it is fairly normal.
What's next for you and the team at Humu? Because one thing that I was absolutely fascinated by, obviously I followed Laszlo's work beforehand and as well, but we don't kind of hear much from the business in terms of like, they're not kind of screaming out from the rafters in terms of media or events or promoting the work you do. Is that because you're just already so busy serving clients? I know it may sound like a silly question, but I know of the business, but I know there's also quite a lot of people that aren't aware of the organization. Is that because you're just gearing up for huge launches, or you're just kind of quietly been churning away with, current kind of clients you're working on?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we kind of two things. One, you will hear a lot more from us next year. But two, the company's been around for 3 years. And in the first year and a half, I'd say we had so much inbound interest that, especially for a small company with constraints, it just made sense to invest completely in like engineering and product and really building out this solution for people. Again, that's just about helping them take action, nudging people to develop better work habits. And over the last year, we've gotten the product to a place where we can now make some tweaks, figure out what would actually make it a lot better. And so in 2021, one of our big focus areas is marketing. So hopefully you will hear about us a lot more.
Listen, if you've got that many inbounds, then fair play. Then, and I know so many of my clients that are also clients of yours, and a lot of the CHROs I work with always have incredible things to say.
That's great to hear.
I'm not surprised as well. But I've always found it funny that I just never see you advertising anything. But I'm like, that's good. Look, if you've got so many inbounds, then keep doing great work.
Well, 2021, we're trying to increase our inbounds. So
we'll look out for you then. And I'm sure you're going to be pretty busy then as head of content.
Yeah. It'll be fun. It'll be an adventure.
Yeah. Before we wrap up with this, we covered quite a lot, and thank you so much for taking the time to come out and share your journey experience. I'm super excited to share the book with the listeners as well, and for them to grab a copy. But if there's sort of a parting piece of advice that you'd give to our listeners, what would that be? And then also, where's the best place they can connect with you and also grab a copy of the book?
Yeah. So my parting advice would be sort of at the very core of it all, which is you can't check your feelings at the door when you go to work. We are emotional creatures. And so given that you're going to have emotions, just giving yourself permission to feel them and then also explore them. So you really want to identify the need behind what's driving your emotion. If suddenly you're really irritable, I'm not saying be a feelings fire hose and just tell everyone that they're irritating you at all. That's not my advice. But my advice is take a step back and think, why might I be irritable? Is it because I'm actually anxious because I'm going to miss a deadline and I need to talk to the team about it? Is it because I haven't had coffee yet? Is it, there's so many reasons why we might have an emotion, and understanding what it's trying to tell us and then taking action can just smooth so many issues in the workplace. I think we think of emotion at work as exploding, as yelling, as crying, because we never learn to solve these problems when they're very small. And so we just suppress and suppress and suppress. And then the only outlet we have is these explosions. And so giving yourself permission, one, to feel it, and then also to kind of take the time to explore what's driving it and address that problem before you're crying in the office.
And then where can people connect with you if they want to say hello, reach out?
Yeah, so I think the book is available anywhere books are sold, Amazon, local bookstore, whatever your preference is. It's called No Hard Feelings. And then lizandmolly.com, Liz and Mollie. And we have assessments there. People can learn about their emotional tendencies, emotional care, how their team works together. So that's also a resource.
Amazing. Well, for everyone listening, I'll make sure if you click the link below in the description, all of those links will already be there to make your life easy as well. So click below and grab a copy of the book and connect with, and you're on LinkedIn as well, right? People can connect
on
with
LinkedIn as well, correct.
And do that. But thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate you sharing your advice and guidance, and I wish you all the best until we speak next year, and super excited to hear more from Humu as well.
Yes, we will be out there. Thanks so much for having me.